Mark chapter 5, verses 21 to 43. When Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. He pleaded earnestly with him, "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live." So Jesus went with him. A large crowd followed and pressed around him. A woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and spent all she had. Yet, instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, "If I just touch his clothes, I will be healed." Immediately, her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once, Jesus realized that the power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" "You see the people crowding against you," his disciples answered, "and yet you can ask, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, and trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." While Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. "Your daughter is dead," they said. "Why bother the teacher anymore?" Overhearing what they said, Jesus told him, "Don't be afraid, just believe." He did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw a commotion with the people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them, "Why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep." But they laughed at him. After he put them all out, he took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him and went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, "Talitha kum," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, get up." Immediately the girl stood up and began to walk around. She was 12 years old. At this, they were completely astonished. He gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this and told them to give her something to eat. Jesus gets down from the boat. A synagogue leader named Jairus falls at his feet. He pleads earnestly with Jesus, "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her, and she will be healed and live." So Jesus goes with him. Now, for the readers of Mark, this is a very surprising development. Earlier in Mark chapter 3, the teachers of the law come from Jerusalem and condemn Jesus as the person who casts out evil spirits by the power of Beelzebul, the prince of demons, which is Satan. So I wonder if these Jerusalem leaders sent directives to all the synagogues in Galilee not to associate with Jesus. Jesus is controlled by Satan, they said. Jairus, the father of the 12-year-old daughter, is a synagogue ruler. Is he risking his reputation by coming to Jesus? He is indeed desperate. "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live." And when Jesus and Jairus are walking briskly to his house, Jesus suddenly stops. Someone touches his cloak. Jesus feels the power of healing come out of him. Jairus and his daughter are not the only desperate people in this story. A woman was there who had been bleeding for 12 years. She suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and spent all she had. Instead of getting better, she grew worse. And when she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak because she thought, "If I just touch Jesus' clothes, I will be healed." Immediately, her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. And the dilemma of the woman is something we all dread. This woman has suffered menstrual bleeding for 12 years. She has struggled with this physical condition as old as Jairus' daughter, 12 years. And she's been to the doctors, and the doctors have not been able to heal her. In the Old Testament law, a woman who is going through menstrual bleeding is regarded as ceremonially unclean. Therefore, she's afraid of crowds. She mixes into the crowd's door behind Jesus. She holds out her hand and touches his cloak. And to her amazement, the bleeding stops. She is freed from her suffering. So I wonder how Jairus feels as Jesus is talking to this woman. My daughter is nearly dying. Why is Jesus taking his time to get to my house? And while Jesus is still speaking with this woman, some people come from the house of Jairus, and they say, "Your daughter Jairus is dead. Why bother the teacher anymore?" Overhearing what these people tell Jairus, Jesus tells them, "Don't be afraid. Just believe." Don't be afraid. Just believe. Fear not. Trust me. I wonder how Jairus and his wife feel when Jesus says these words to them. Their daughter is dead. And things get worse for Jesus. When they come to the house of Jairus, Jesus sees a commotion with the people crying and wailing loudly. And he goes to say to these professional mourners, "Why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep." But they laughed at him. In those days, there was a custom for professional mourners to come to a house once a person is dead. And as Jesus speaks to these professional mourners, he claims that this 12-year-old daughter is not dead but asleep, and they all laugh at him, which I feel in some ways is as Mark tells us that the daughter is dead, but Jesus claims she's asleep. I remember visiting the palliative care ward of Credit Valley Hospital for the first time in September 2007. I was in pastoral ministry in Richmond Hill. Parishioners of mine asked me to visit a friend of theirs at Credit Valley Hospital who was dying of cancer. I had been to visit this friend in his home in Mississauga earlier. So therefore, as I walked into the palliative care ward at Credit Valley Hospital, I knew this family well. And as I was visiting with them, I could not help but notice the scene in the visitors' room. In it was what for me was a very sad sight I will never forget. One of the palliative care residents was a young mother. Her husband was with her, and so were her 3 children under 3 years of age. They were having lunch together. I could not get over the emotion that this young mother had precious little time left on earth. She would want to spend every remaining moment she has left with her children, her 3 children, and her husband. So the only thing that she can give them at this stage of her life is her time with them, to make precious memories with them, which they can keep after she's gone. While she's alive, she wants to do everything necessary to make sure that they remember her for who she was. And it is at moments like this that I find it very difficult to pray these words of Jesus. Don't be afraid, just believe. Fear not, trust me. And these are the words of Jesus as Jesus walks into the room with the 12-year-old daughter of Jairus lying dead. Can they trust Jesus? A little bit about the woman who touches Jesus' cloak. Her menstrual bleeding stops when she touches Jesus' cloak. She feels freed from her physical suffering, and she tries to disappear in the crowd, but Jesus won't let her. At once, Jesus realized that the power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" "You see the people crowding against you," his disciples answered. "Yet you can ask, 'Who touched me?'" As we read this passage, we know that Jesus does not want to let this woman go quietly. He claims the power has gone out of him and says, "Who touched me?" This woman has endured 12 years of being let down by doctors. And during these 12 years, she has endured the suffering as an unclean woman under Old Testament ceremonial law. So Jesus then looks around for the person who touched his cloak, and the woman now realizes that she cannot hide in the crowds. She needs to own up in front of Jesus. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, and trembling with fear, told him the truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." When this bleeding stopped, the woman is healed in what I call part of a condition. Let's call it the physical condition. However, she has been labeled as an unclean woman by her community for 12 years. And I believe Jesus will not let her go because Jesus wants her to experience complete healing. Having experienced the stopping of the bleeding, is this woman going to retreat to her life of seclusion again? What does this woman do? She falls at Jesus' feet. She tells him the whole truth. And it's not only Jesus who hears the whole truth, the crowds gathering around Jesus also hear her speak. "I touched your cloak. Immediately, the bleeding in me stopped. Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you, Lord." And this is probably the first time in her life this woman has spoken in public for many years. Jesus does not know her by name. However, when she speaks to her, he calls out to her, "Daughter," a very affirming title Jesus gives to this woman. He reaffirms her place in the synagogue. She is a daughter of Abraham. "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." Jesus completes the healing of this woman. He restores her to a place in society. Jesus heals this woman in the most profound way. So I wonder how Jairus and his wife are feeling as they walk into that room with their dead daughter in it. If only the teacher was here earlier, our daughter would not have died. What if Jesus did not stop for the woman? If Jairus and his wife had such thoughts, I can understand. No parent would like to see their child predecease them. Today, as we read the story, they are desperate people. There is a woman who has been bleeding for 12 years. There are Jairus and his wife whose daughter has just died. And the situation is compounded by the disciples of Jesus who are asking him, "What's the big deal with being in the crowds and feeling the power go out of you?" Jesus is a very popular guy and people crowd around him and touch his clothes. And the professional mourners do not help Jesus. They laugh at Jesus when he says that Jairus' daughter is not dead but asleep. So before we come into this quiet room, there have been many voices in this story. How noisy the world is. It is now quiet. Only Peter, Jesus, James, John, Jairus, and Jairus' wife are in the room with the dead daughter. No more noisy professional mourners, no more big crowd. Can you hear the silence? He took her by the hand and said to her, "Talitha kum," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, get up." Immediately the girl stood up and began to walk around. She was 12 years old. At this, they were completely astonished. He gave orders not to let anyone know about this and told them to give her something to eat. Jesus takes this daughter's, Jesus takes her by the hand. In first century Jewish law, it is unclean to touch the body of a dead corpse. There are special regulations for doing that. Jesus ignores these special regulations. He immediately touches the hand of the dead corpse. He takes the girl by the hand and helps her up. Here are we with Jesus, Peter, James, John, Jairus, and Jairus' wife in this quiet room. This is a matter between you and Jesus. There are things in your life which you think are dead. It is whatever looks like an insurmountable problem for you. You know the noisy people around you. They are laughing at you. They are laughing at the Jesus you believe in. Jesus says that the girl is asleep, not dead. And Jesus says the same thing to you as he said to Jairus and his wife. Don't be afraid. Just believe. Fear not. Trust me. And then Jesus, in the quietest of time in your life, when you least expect it, when you are in that very quiet moment, he will take you by the hand and raise you up. So I say to you, reach out for Jesus' hand. Reach out for Jesus' cloak. He wants to take you up by the hand and raise you